This is Donna from Rathdrum in northern Idaho, and you are listening to California Dreaming on the Orbital Jigsaw Network.
This episode of California Dreaming is brought to you by BLUBRRY. Creating a podcast isn't that simple. It's more than just recording yourself and uploading it. To really get your show to be everything you want it to be, you're going to need a little bit more than that. You need easy and reliable hosting so your time can be spent creating your content. The most accurate download stats so you know that you're reaching the audience that you're wanting to. And a web page that makes setting up totally easy on you and won't take up too much of your valuable time. And BLUBRRY offers all of this and more for hosts and aspiring hosts alike. Simple media hosting, a fully integrated WordPress website with their PowerPress sites. So, if you already have a podcast or you've always dreamed about starting one, head over to www.orbitaljigsaw.com/dream to sign up, and the first month is on us. The BLUBRRY support team is available to walk you through the steps of migrating your show without losing any subscribers, or to help you get started in the process of launching your new show. With the first month for free, using promo code DREAM, you've got no excuses. So, let's get started. I want to first take the time to thank California Dreaming's newest Patreon supporters, Michelle R., Jennifer S., Chad D., Michelle G., and Marjorie S. Your generosity is greatly appreciated. And if you would like to help support the production of California Dreaming and gain access to all of the bonus content on Patreon, you can join for as little as $1 a month. And if you would like to make a one-time donation, you can do so through PayPal using our email, californiapod@yahoo.com. You can also support the show by following us on social media on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Tell your friends about the show. And hey, if you really like it, please go to iTunes or your favorite podcatcher and leave a nice review. All of that helps give the show more visibility, which will bring us more listeners. Thank you again for all of your support. I also need to take the time to thank Facebook commenter, Patreon supporter, loyal dreamer, and Oakland, California resident Jen M. for reminding me of this tragedy that we're going to talk about today. Although this case has yet to make its way through the court system, it almost had, if not for some twists and turns in the story. But we can't always revisit it in the future for some updates. So, thank you again, Jen, for the reminder. Dreamers, we're going to talk about building fires today, specifically nightclub fires. There have been all kinds of building fires that have resulted in the deaths of many people who were either trapped or overcome by smoke, or were unable for one reason or another to escape the blaze and perished. We just passed the 17th anniversary of the 9/11 terrorist attacks at the World Trade Center and at the Pentagon, which obviously involved people killed upon impact of airplanes, but also the explosions and fires that ensued. The world watched helplessly as people desperately leaned out of windows in the stories above the impact zones of the North and South Towers. At the time, and maybe I was being naive, but I didn't think that those that were trapped had no chance of being rescued. But I also never thought that those buildings would topple. Every year when we observe the anniversary of that day, I always take a look at the images with so much grief and sadness. And I remember the fear and anxiety all of us experienced as this attack on our country unfolded. I look at the tiny images of people in those windows up in the sky, and I wonder what was going through their minds. I think about the decisions that they had to make. The decision to face the fire or fly. I think about what I would have done, and I have no answer. We saw them leaning. They climbed, they fell, or they leapt. Some of them leapt together. Some are thought to have tried to climb down a floor lower and lost their grip. Some are thought to have fallen through the gaping hole that the planes left, blinded by smoke, disoriented, not knowing which direction to go. It's estimated about 200 people jumped, but the actual number can't truly be verified. In the end, everyone who died as a result of the plane crash and the building collapse, they would all share the same cause of death: blunt impact trauma. One of the very first building fires I remember hearing about, widely reported on the news, was the November 21st, 1980 fire at the MGM Grand Hotel and Casino in Las Vegas. I was only 5, almost 6 at the time, and I remember having traveled to Vegas just a day or two after the fire, as it was a frequent vacation destination for my parents for many years. We only lived 4 hours away by car, and I still do. I was just there a couple weeks ago as I'm writing this. I think about that fire when I passed the corner on which the MGM had stood at the time. It's now Bally's Las Vegas, and the MGM moved across the street from there. On this last trip, we did drive up Las Vegas Boulevard as we headed towards Binion's Horseshoe, which is towards the north end of the strip in downtown Las Vegas. But this time, my thoughts were consumed with the Vegas shooting last year as we drove past the Mandalay Bay. And I stared at the empty lot where the Route 91 Harvest Music Festival was taking place when the attack commenced, ending with 58 innocent lives lost and hundreds of others injured. It seems so somber, doesn't it, that these are the things I think about as we're driving up arguably one of the most entertaining strips in the country, the Las Vegas Strip. Eventually, though, we did pass by where the old MGM stood, and I thought about that fire. And we eventually made our way to downtown Las Vegas, where I went into Binion's from our What Happens in Vegas episode back in April. I had planned on stopping at the border to visit the casino arcade where Sharice Iverson was murdered, but I ended up backing out of going there. I just got a weird vibe about it. It felt like a little bit too morbid. So, the MGM fire. This one was a game changer when it came to fire safety regulations in high-rise hotels. The MGM was only 26 stories, so it wasn't the tallest of buildings, but the manner in which the fire spread through the hotel highlighted the dangers of the way things used to be when it came to fire safety. When the fire broke out, there were about 5,000 people inside the hotel and casino. A little after 7 in the morning, on November 21st, 1980, a fire ignited inside a restaurant located in the MGM called The Deli. It just so happened that there was a tile crew inspecting the restaurant at that time in the morning, and they were the first to notice a flickering light coming from the restaurant, and it turned out to be an inferno. Fire departments, engines, Metro Police helicopters from North Las Vegas, Vegas Fire and Rescue, Henderson Fire Department, as well as choppers from Nellis Air Force Base, all joined in the massive effort to rescue the more than 1,000 hotel guests and employees who managed to make their way onto the roof of the hotel tower. This fire was fed by the hotel's wallpaper, PVC pipes, glue, and plastic mirrors all over the lobby. The fire moved through the hotel at a rate of 15 to 19 feet or 4.6 to 5.8 meters per second, at which point, when it reached the main entrance of the MGM that opened up onto the Las Vegas Strip, a massive fireball blew out the main doors. The entire first story of the casino lobby was completely engulfed in under 6 minutes, and there were no fire sprinklers installed in any of the key areas of the casino at the time. 18 people perished on the casino level. The materials that were burning as a result of the fire created extremely toxic fumes and smoke. These toxic fumes rose upwards into the hotel tower, using elevator shafts, stairwells, and seismic joints as pathways to the upper floors. Evacuation efforts were mired because of the elevators at the time that were not equipped with an automatic means of returning them to the main levels during a fire. This led to 10 deaths inside one of the elevator cars. There were no smoke detectors anywhere in the hotel or casino, and the manual fire alarms failed to work. So no one who was asleep at the time was alerted by anyone or anything that a fire was raging in the casino below. 85 people in all were killed. 7 of them were employees of the MGM Grand. Approximately 650 people were injured, and this included guests, employees, along with 14 firefighters. The fire itself remained isolated to the casino level of the building. However, the majority of the deaths, 61 of them in all, occurred between floors 18 and 24, mostly in the stairwells. All the doors were locked except the door to the roof and the door to the stairs on the ground level. It was at these levels that the toxic fumes and smoke concentrated at their highest levels. Some hotel guests died as they slept in their beds. 75 out of the 85 who were killed died of smoke inhalation and carbon monoxide poisoning. 4 died of smoke inhalation only. 3 died of a combination of burns and smoke inhalation. 1 from burns alone, and 1 from blunt force trauma after jumping out from a hotel window. It was later discovered that the fire remained contained in the casino and the restaurant areas of the building. The MGM was equipped with some fire sprinklers that protected only the areas where the money was being counted. Individual hotel rooms and the gaming areas were not equipped with sprinklers or any other means of fire suppression. After an investigation into the fire was completed, it was determined that the fire was caused by an electrical ground fault inside a wall socket. So I'm going to go through this the best that I can because I'm obviously not a fire investigator, nor am I an electrician. But as I read through the cause of the fire and how exceedingly careless the oversight actually was, it's absolutely heartbreaking to go through these tragedies and watch each domino fall in this chain of events, leading to this massive fireball that caused toxic fumes to bleed upwards into the hotel tower. So, there was this refrigerated pastry display case added sometime following the original construction of the hotel inside the deli restaurant. These display cases were not made completely self-contained like they are today, with a compressor installed at the bottom of the display case. The unit that was installed was more like a walk-in cooler or a central air conditioning unit. It had a set of copper refrigerant lines that connected its evaporator to a condensing unit that was located outside the building. So, when the refrigerated display case was installed, the copper lines ran through the same wall soffit as the electrical conduit that had previously been running through there. These new copper lines were actually in physical contact with the pre-existing conduit. The evaporator unit of the refrigerated display case was fan-forced, and it was haphazardly installed and not properly secured, so when it was running, the evaporator unit was constantly vibrating, and the vibrations of the unit were being carried along the copper refrigerant lines, and this caused those pipes to rub against the electrical conduit that they were installed next to and were in constant contact inside the wall soffit, and this in turn caused the electrical conduit to vibrate as well. So the combination of galvanic corrosion, in this case where the copper refrigerant pipes were in physical contact with the aluminum electrical conduit, resulting in the conduit to erode over a period of time. So this corrosion, in combination with the vibration, caused the unsecured evaporation unit, as well as the jagged edges and stretch wires that were in place due to shoddy workmanship of those who completed the installation of the refrigerated display case. The electrical wires inside the conduit were left with missing pieces of the protective plastic insulation. This rendered the conduit ungrounded. There was no separate ground wire. The metal conduit was designed to function as the ground, so when the conduit disintegrated, it became ungrounded. So what happened next was these now unprotected, bare electrical conductors inside the ungrounded metal conduit started to become red hot, and it began arcing. This is what ignited the fire. It has been reported that this fire smoldered for hours until fresh oxygen was introduced into the environment, causing the fire to burst aggressively into the casino, which was filled with combustible materials, fueling the fire, causing it to spread at an incredibly fast pace. And here is the laundry list of reasons why this fire, which itself was caused by poor workmanship and negligence, why this fire was deadlier than it should have been. Obviously, starting with the carelessness with which the electrical work was completed, there are actually several other factors that led to the deaths. There were faulty smoke dampers in the ventilation ducts, allowing toxic fumes to circulate through the hotel's air conditioning systems quickly and efficiently, accelerating the spread of the poisonous fumes and smoke, all of which spread at a very rapid pace. The hotel's elevator shafts were situated above the restaurant and the casino, allowing for a convenient route for the smoke and fumes to travel. The fire doors in the stairwells were designed to automatically lock, so guests began propping them open, and this too allowed for smoke to spread more quickly through the stairwells. Fire sprinkler systems were not installed at the casino and restaurant areas because they were given an exemption from the rules requiring fire sprinklers in areas occupied 24 hours a day, so the MGM Grand was not up to code at the time that this fire erupted. Despite the opposition of the fire marshal, a Clark County building inspector granted this exemption, citing that a fire would be quickly noticed by anyone in the immediate area and could be contained with fire extinguishers. When the fire broke out, the restaurant was closed, and it just so happened that there were tile inspectors there at the time to notice the flickering of the flames. The hotel would go on to be repaired and brought up to code with the addition of sprinklers and an automatic fire alarm system installed throughout the entire building and property. 90 days after the MGM fire, there was another fire at the Las Vegas Hilton which killed 5 people. In the wake of these 2 incidents, fire safety guidelines and regulations were reformed. All buildings in the state of Nevada open to the public were required to have fire sprinklers, smoke detectors in all rooms and elevators, and evacuation maps in every hotel room. The changes in legislation went into effect the following year, propelling Nevada to the forefront of fire safety standards. I also wanted to talk to you about another nightclub fire that made some big headlines across the country, but I'm thinking this episode is going to be a little bit too long, so I need to get to today's story. What I've decided to do is include it as a bonus. Even though it didn't happen in California, we can kind of sort of make it a mini vacation episode that I'll release hopefully around the same time this episode goes live in the normal feed. But for today, I wanted to tell you about a warehouse fire that devastated the community of Oakland, California on a December night almost 2 years ago. In today's 63rd episode of California Dreaming, the tale of the ghost ship fire. 22-year-old Cash Eskew, 33-year-old M. Bolka, 34-year-old Jonathan Birnbaum, 35-year-old Barrett Clark, 24-year-old David Klein, 28-year-old Micah Dannemeyer, 35-year-old Billy Dixon, 33-year-old Chelsea Dolan, 29-year-old Farrell Pines, 35-year-old Alex Gasson, 25-year-old Nick Gomez Hall, 20-year-old Michaela Gregory, 30-year-old Sarah Hoda, 35-year-old Travis Huff, 34-year-old Johnny Igaz, 29-year-old Era Joe, 32-year-old Donna Kellogg, 34-year-old Amanda Kershaw, 34-year-old Edmund Lapine, 23-year-old Griffin Madden, 36-year-old Joseph Matlock, 36-year-old Jason McCarty, 17-year-old Draven McGill, 35-year-old Jennifer Mendiola, 21-year-old Jennifer Morris, 21-year-old Vanessa Plotkin, 61-year-old Wolfgang Renner, 32-year-old Hannah Rao, 32-year-old Benjamin Runnels, 29-year-old Nicole Segrist, 37-year-old Michelle Sylvan, 31-year-old Jennifer Tanoe, 22-year-old Alex Vega, 38-year-old Peter Wadsworth, 31-year-old Nick Walrath, and 32-year-old Brandon Wittenauer. These were 36 people who were enjoying a concert inside the ghost ship warehouse when something went wrong. What is the ghost ship? Well, it was a large warehouse measuring 9,880 square feet or 918 square meters that had been converted into an artist collective comprised of a group of artists who lived and worked there together in the building. Generally speaking, those who resided in the ghost ship warehouse shared this space working together. They forged relationships akin to an extended family, pooling resources, sharing space and ideologies. Located at 1305 31st Street, the ghost ship warehouse was considered a safe place for those who communally resided there, living, working, and sharing just to get by in the chasm that is the growing unaffordability of the cost of living in California. All sorts of creative souls dwelled within the maze, shrouded by what would otherwise appear on the outside to be a completely unassuming, innocuous warehouse. Musicians, poets, artists, just to name a few. It is difficult to put into words what the inside of the two-story warehouse was like. We would really have to look at pictures to be able to appreciate what the ghost ship consisted of. There were anywhere from 10 to 15 residents who had their own space to live in, but it would be hard to tell how many people were actually official residents at any given time. Their entire space was improvised, divided by wooden pallets and 2x4s. But that would only be the official dividing lines between each space. The entire building, both floors, were filled with an enormous collection of things. Odd things, old things, antique things, things from all over the world, things somebody once threw away and another person saw value in or reimagined. It was essentially a tangled matrix of musical instruments, sofas, lamps, lampshades, odd pieces of furniture, speakers, rugs, hanging pictures, pieces of artwork, hanging lanterns, Tiffany lamps, stools, nightstands, cushions, pianos, knickknacks, random pieces of wood everywhere. The warehouse was like one art project in and of itself. One reporter once described being in awe of it while being horrified by it at the same time. Everything was kind of makeshift, kind of quirky, kind of peculiar, but it was functional to an extent. It served as a living space, a workspace, and sometimes a music venue. The proprietors of the warehouse were two men, Derick Almena and Max Harris. The warehouse was rented by Almena from the owner, a woman named Chorn Ing, and it is my understanding that Harris is the one who organized and booked events and sublet the spaces to residents. Needless to say, nothing about the building was up to code in terms of a residential space. Bathrooms were equipped with propane used as a means of heating during the cold months. The transformer was actually illegally installed and hooked up to PG&E, which is Pacific Gas and Electric. Sometimes the building wouldn't even have running water. Because of all this, you can imagine it made living conditions a challenge, and this would lead to regular disagreements between those who had to share the close-quartered living area. So people moving out and new people moving in was a pretty regular occurrence. And if you happened to get kicked out of the place, your stuff stayed. But there was never a shortage of people who wanted, more likely needed, to stay there due to a lack of affordable housing. Other issues swirled around the existence of the warehouse and its use in housing struggling artists who were unable to find affordable places to live. There are questions of safety, not to mention the legality of allowing people to inhabit a dwelling such as this. If these individuals came together to reside communally in a dwelling such as the ghost ship because they can't afford to live anywhere else, then should they just be allowed to do so? Where else are they supposed to go? And if they set up in a warehouse such as this, whose responsibility is it to make sure that they are safe? If things aren't up to code, are the residents going to want to complain? Is it likely they would just put up with shoddy conditions out of fear of losing their homes? If some authority or code enforcement representative were to compel the owners to bring these buildings up to code because they are being used as work and living spaces for struggling artists and musicians, what if the owners just decided they simply don't care to spend the money or take the time to do so, that it would be better to suit them to just evict everyone and leave the warehouse as it was meant to be, a warehouse, not a place to live in? I can imagine it would be far more costly to make all the necessary repairs and renovations to bring the warehouse up to code than to just have everyone move out. So that's the catch. The owners and or the proprietors offer spaces for rent at a very low cost to people who can't otherwise afford housing. The place is in substandard conditions, the price the residents pay for the low rent. The complaints are minimal, if not non-existent altogether, because nobody wants to get kicked out. It's a win for the proprietor, who is likely making more money renting out space to residents than if he or she simply used the space for storage or whatever else. And it's a win for residents, who essentially have a roof over their heads, albeit a place that is not meant to house people in. As Oakland, which a town known for its artistic scene and these clandestine live and work makeshift living spaces, has become more and more gentrified, everything is becoming more and more unaffordable. Rent in the Bay Area continued to skyrocket, and places set aside for creative, artistic, and musical expression were vanishing. And then people got desperate. The ghost ship was a haven for artists looking for a place to live, work, and create. But the sentiment felt by most is the proprietor saw that there was a need for low-cost housing for these people. They were exploited and taken advantage of. They paid a cheap price for housing that was by and large unsafe to live in. And again, to avoid the risk of losing an inexpensive place to live, hazards and substandard conditions often go unreported, and it is so difficult to find a living space. And part of trying to raise money to help offset the cost of rent, residents would host large parties with musical guests. With all its quirkiness, it was considered an eclectic venue for these types of gatherings. This, going on in a place that is riddled with code violations and safety hazards, are all the makings of a disaster just waiting to happen. An important aspect of this story is the story behind these warehouses, which I've briefly touched on, and that will certainly need to be understood by those of us who aren't familiar with the rich artistic culture of Oakland, California, myself included. Because even if you're from California, Northern and Southern California can feel completely different, like separate states almost, because the distance to traverse from north to south is vast. But Oakland is situated across from San Francisco, separated by the bay. And San Francisco is the most expensive city in the United States to live in, followed by New York, San Jose, and Oakland comes in fourth. Artists, musicians, poets, experimental and independent individuals had found themselves these unconventional, affordable, cooperative spaces to live in Oakland. These warehouses turned collectives are common in the area, and the parties and events that are often held inside these warehouses are a huge part of their work and livelihood. According to an article I read in The Guardian, it is said of the Ghost Ship and other warehouses like it, quote, "The city's underground spaces, which may lack traditional permits or business licenses, are particularly vital for the LGBTQ artists and people of color, often excluded from the mainstream industry dominated by white men. There is a movement in Oakland of experimental Black, brown, and queer people who don't necessarily want to be in a bar or a club. These underground venues are vital to the fabric of Oakland, not only because of the opportunities they provide for underrepresented artists, but also because many functioned as welcoming spaces for marginalized people who feel unsafe in licensed clubs where they may be harassed or assaulted just for trying to live their lives." I didn't really know that much about this underground community in Oakland, and this, just coming off the heels of our episode about the murder of Gwen Araujo, which is going to mark its 16th anniversary in October, it's disheartening to see that the mistreatment of the marginalized individuals in the community is still going strong, if not worse than ever. And not only that, but being used and taken advantage of by landlords and property owners who don't care about the lives and safety of their fellow human beings, as long as their pockets are being lined with their money. Of course, the warehouse did have a documented history of complaints and code violations, as all of these things are kept on city records. Even as late as mid-November of 2016, there had been what was called a housing habitability charge in regards to some illegal interior building structure. By December 2nd, when our story takes place, the investigation into that specific complaint was still pending. Also in November of 2016, records indicate that the city of Oakland had issued a citation to the proprietors of the warehouse related to a complaint about some unsightliness on the outside of the building, which is called a blight complaint, specifically trash that was accumulating on the property, as well as spilling over onto the sidewalk. The violation also indicated that the garbage was considered to be a health hazard and it was problematic for the surrounding residents in the neighborhood. At least one former tenant at the Ghost Ship who did not want to be identified in the media because of previous contentious interactions with those who managed the building had actually made a formal report about the fire hazards inside the dwelling to the fire marshal back in 2014. There was an additional blight complaint dating back to 2014 and again noted trash and other debris, but the records also indicated that the violation was corrected and the garbage and debris was removed from the property. So it isn't like the city officials aren't aware that the place is a hazard. There are a number of safety issues related to the dwelling. The warehouse is not up to code and is not to be used for housing. So many things wrong with the situation, and it is not the only place like this in the city of Oakland or in the surrounding Bay Area for that matter. All of these places have similar issues. A number of articles have even stated that these warehouse collectives are almost an essential part of the fabric of the city. But the hazards and code violations that plague these types of makeshift residences are either ignored because tenants just put up with it for the cheap rent, or they slip through the bureaucratic cracks in the system. According to city records, the ghost ship warehouse was permitted by the city of Oakland to operate as a warehouse, not for residential living. In addition, in order to house a musical event or a party, it is a requirement for the warehouse proprietors to obtain a permit and to do so through the city as well, which was not done either. A former resident of the ghost ship described there being about 10 RVs or trailers parked inside the warehouse. On top of the RVs, residents erected makeshift living quarters, like small studio apartments with living rooms, and the RV down below was used for storage. What else was notable about the things that were kept throughout the warehouse is that many things were made out of wood. Lots of wood frame sofas, countless pieces of wooden furniture and random objects and trinkets. And there were apparently over 100 old wooden pianos. Many of the walkways and corridors, the makeshift walls that were erected to divide areas, all of it was made of wood. All kinds of different pieces of wood puzzled together. There was reportedly even a staircase made out of wooden pallets. It was very hazardous, unstable, and unsafe. All of it perfectly suited for tinder under just the right circumstances. Many residents were smokers, and they did not go outside the building to smoke, which I'm guessing was generally an accepted practice. I am not a smoker, but most of the people that I know who are smokers do go outside. But in a situation like the one at the ghost ship warehouse, where it's accepted to smoke inside, previous residents have pointed out that they would sometimes fall asleep with cigarettes still burning. One way or another, many felt the warehouse was a conflagration waiting to happen. And this worried some of the previous residents, as if I were to take a guess, I would say there weren't any smoke detectors installed in everyone's individual living spaces either. It would later be reported that no smoke detectors were ever heard, and no sprinklers were installed inside the building. So now let's go over the timeline of the events of December 2nd, 2016. That was a Friday, and just before midnight, the first calls began coming in about a fire at the Ghost Ship Warehouse Artist Collective. Firefighters soon arrived to find the warehouse completely engulfed in flames, fire spewing out from 3 sides of the building. People who were attending the music event that was going on at the time began to notice smoke beginning to drift through the building. The concert, which was described as more of a rave, was taking place on the 2nd floor, and there had been an estimated as many as 50 up to 100 people inside at the time the fire broke out. People began to yell, attempting to get everyone out of the building, and it wasn't immediately obvious a fire had ignited somewhere in the warehouse. And if you remember, this building was one big hazard and safety violation. There were no designated escape routes in the case of a fire or an emergency. And if you also remember, I told you about one staircase leading to the upstairs area of the warehouse that was constructed of pallets. I could easily see myself rolling my ankle or my foot falling through the slats of one of those things, and then taking a hard tumble. Imagine trying to get down a pallet staircase in a panic. And it was only one of 2 staircases that led from downstairs to upstairs, and there were only 2 exits out of the entire building. I will go into more detail as to the interior of this building when we get to the official report on the fire. And as you can imagine from the way I described how the inside of the warehouse was constructed, with so many wooden pieces of furniture and odds and ends, this fire spread with a ferocious speed. With the majority of people upstairs, the warehouse was essentially becoming a death trap. By 2 a.m, the pallets that had been fashioned into stairs had disintegrated by the fire, which originated on the ground floor. The wooden pallets were not only destroyed, they fed the fire like kindling. And once the stairs were gone, those who were on the upstairs were unable to make it down in time and were trapped on the 2nd floor. And up there was no way out. There was no escaping. Firefighters struggled to save those trapped, doing everything that they could, but they too were hampered by the design of the building, the raging inferno, and the instability of the structure as a whole. After 4 hours and the assistance of as many as 52 firefighters, the fire was finally extinguished, but they were still unable to make entry into the building. The fire had so severely damaged the structure, it was simply unsafe to go in. They knew there were going to be multiple fatalities. They just weren't going to be able to tell until they could begin to safely make their way inside and assess the totality of the damage and the lives lost. The interior of the warehouse was a virtual maze prior to the fire, so that, along with the extent of the damage, the possibility of further deterioration and collapse of the compromised structure made for a very tedious search and recovery effort ahead. By 9 a.m. Saturday morning, officials were getting word from worried families and loved ones of those who were missing or hadn't been heard from, that were thought to have been in attendance at the music event the previous evening. The Oakland Police Department issued a list of names who they believed were missing, hoping that they may come forward to let their whereabouts be known so they could be crossed off the list. At the same time, Facebook activated its safety check for the fire in Oakland, California. And as the citizens of the city began to wake up to the news of the tragedy that occurred while they slept, the news of the fire at the ghost ship warehouse began spreading across news outlets, newspapers, and social media, not just in Oakland, but across the country. We all were hearing about it, looking at the images of the burnt-out warehouse, its roof caved in, a charred shell of what it once was. The recovery was tedious, as the building was too dangerous. At one point the morning following the fire, efforts to search for possible survivors as well as victims had to be halted, as it was deemed unsafe for firefighters and emergency responders to go inside to conduct their work and their searches. They first needed to secure the structural integrity of the building before they would be able to proceed forward. Even when the search and rescue were given the okay to attempt to make entry into the building, it was difficult for them to even make it a few steps or more inside because of the massive amounts of debris that had been deposited everywhere around them. Remember, this place had been an intricate labyrinth of just stuff. So much stuff. Stuff that had once been a sight to marvel at for some, ended up becoming fuel for an inferno. And now it was choking off search efforts as well. Eventually, officials brought in drones so they could survey the inside of the building from above to better assess all of the wreckage that the ghost ship had now become. Those working to remove the debris did so by carrying out burnt-up pieces in 5-gallon buckets. Little by little, bucket by bucket. The Alameda County Sheriff told the media, quote, "The roof has collapsed down onto the second floor, and we have to literally go in there piece by piece and move wood and timber and debris. This is not an easy task by any means. With all the debris and wreckage that's there, we are slowly working our way in, but we have to work systematically because any misstep from our people could mean they could get injured or fall through a floor or have something fall on top of them." At 1 p.m., our Governor Jerry Brown issued a statement to the media expressing his condolences to the families of those whose lives were lost in the ghost ship fire, stating in part, quote, "Our thoughts are with the entire city in this difficult time, and we extend our condolences to the family and friends of those lost." The mayor of Oakland, Libby Schaaf, referred to the fire as an immense tragedy and promised that the city would make every effort to lend support to the victims and their families. Congresswoman Barbara Lee, representing the East Bay, also expressed her condolences and indicated that she would see to it that federal assistance would be secured to aid in the fire recovery efforts. Family and friends of those who are believed to have been in the music event when the fire erupted began to arrive at the scene and express their grief. They brought flowers. They left notes. They talked with each other, exchanged small talk, some words of support, and they embraced as they waited to hear the fate of their loved ones. Nearby, officials set up a family assistance center to also lend support to those who lost or believe that they lost a loved one in the inferno. It was going to take some time, not only to find everyone, to account for those who were missing, but also to identify each victim. So families and loved ones, all they could do was wait and hope. The Red Cross also arrived nearby and were able to set up a mobile office in order to provide assistance for those who were displaced as a result of the fire, those who lost all of their belongings, as well as to help provide grief counseling for survivors and families. The Oakland A's, for those not familiar, is the city's Major League Baseball team, set up a crowdfunding relief fund for the victims of the fire, and thousands of dollars began to pour in. By 3 p.m. Saturday afternoon, only one body had been recovered from the debris. News helicopters flying above were able to zoom in and get close-up shots of the inside of the warehouse. Construction crews began entering the building to shore up the sides by placing some 4x4s and poles underneath the mezzanine area of the warehouse so the floor would not collapse above them, and the search and recovery crews would be able to work under safe conditions above and below the floor. The work in getting the building to be safe to be in was very tedious, as the Oakland Fire Department was working in conjunction with a specialized structural engineer. That, along with the fire department's technical rescue team, the priority was to make the building 100% safe for entry. By 6 p.m. in the late afternoon that Saturday, the media began reporting as to where in the building the fire had broken out, but it was still early in the investigation. It was also reported to the media that the owners of the property were issued notices of violations in regards to a variety of hazards, including trash and debris surrounding the outside of the dwelling. Authorities also reported that no record of a permit being issued for the rave party or any other type of party had been found, as is required when hosting this type of event in the warehouse. Event organizers are required to obtain a permit through the city before they are allowed to move forward with the concert. The Alameda County Sheriffs also announced to the media that the victims were in the process of being transferred to the coroner's office to be identified, and families will be notified with the news as the identifications are confirmed. Slowly, families were getting the news. Either they were being reunited with their loved one that had been suspected to have been in the party and were found safe, while other families waited for either the same reunion with their loved ones or for the tragic news to come from the coroner. As the sun began to set, work crews brought in lights as well as heavy equipment in order to keep removing debris through the night, so that the victims who were still trapped underneath could be found as quickly as possible. At 7:30 that same evening, the Golden State Warriors, which is the professional NBA basketball team who play at Oracle Arena in Oakland, held a moment of silence for the victims of the ghost ship fire before their game that night. The Warriors, along with the Oakland Raiders and the Oakland A's, all offered support and assistance to the victims of the fire and their families. Around 8:30 Saturday night, the mayor of San Francisco, Ed Lee, issued a statement of his own to the media regarding the ghost ship fire, stating in part, quote, "The fire in Oakland and the loss of so many is heartbreaking. I have been in touch with Mayor Schaaf and have offered the support and condolences of the city and the county of San Francisco. Our hearts and thoughts are with those affected by this tragedy." The UC Berkeley campus newspaper reported that at least 3 of the reported missing people are students at the university. And by 9 p.m., the first evening following the tragedy, the Alameda County Sheriffs announced to the media that 7 out of the first 9 victims had been identified, and they were in the process of notifying their next of kin. And by December 9th, exactly 1 week after the deadly fire, all 36 victims were finally identified. All of them had died as a result of smoke inhalation. They were trapped on the second floor as escape routes were blocked and or destroyed by the fire. The scope of the loss of these 36 lives, the devastation of it, compounded by the fact that each one of them was present in the building at the time in order to engage and express their artistic and creative endeavors. People who define the city of Oakland, the heart and soul of the artistic, creative, and inventive individuals who came together, who leaned on each other, to create a community in a place they would otherwise be unable to afford to live in as a result of the skyrocketing housing costs in the area. And when we step back and absorb the gravity of what we see when we gaze upon the images of the burnt-out shell of the ghost ship, we can't help but ask the question, who is responsible for this? Let's discuss the official report released by the Oakland Fire Department. Among the witnesses interviewed at the scene of the fire investigators spoke initially to Mr. Kai Ng. During this interview, he stated that his family owned the building where the fire took place, as well as the adjacent structures, and they have done so for approximately 25 years. He indicated that the warehouse itself was leased to Derick Almena, and he in turn sublet the spaces to several artists for the purpose of working and hanging out. Mr. Ng told fire investigators that Almena had been previously informed that no one he sublet spaces to is supposed to live in the warehouse. He said that Almena has been leasing the place from his family for about 2.5 years, and that about 3 years ago, he had invested approximately $30,000 on electrical upgrades in the warehouse, and that he was unaware of any current electrical problems. Mr. Ng also told fire investigators that he had not physically been inside the structure for at least 1.5 years. He also stated that his mother, Chon Ng, is a listed owner, but he manages the property due to language barriers. Prior to the fire, the ground floor of the ghost ship consisted of the main entrance, which was situated on 31st Avenue. From there, makeshift hallways led erratically deeper into the building. The hallways were not constructed of traditional materials such as drywall-covered wood-framed walls. Instead, the walls of the hallways were assembled together from aggregates of salvaged and scavenged materials such as pianos, organs, windows, wood benches, lumber, and innumerable other items stacked next to or on top of each other. The warehouse was further divided into individual cubicle live/workspaces by a conglomeration of makeshift items including but not limited to wooden studs, steel beams, doors, window frames, bed frames, railings, pianos, benches, chairs, intact motorhomes, trailers, portions of trailers, corrugated metal sheetings, tapestries, plywood, sculptures, tree stumps, and tree limbs. Tenants described several live/work units that were constructed of multiple levels to the height of the first floor ceiling. The elevated units were variously described as lofts, perches, and tree forts, constructed of actual tree stumps and large dimensional lumber. 2 rudimentary bathrooms were between the front roll-up door and the base of the east wall staircase. Inside the front door to the west was an area the residents referred to as the kitchen. West of the kitchen, in the southwest corner of the building, 4 people had live/workspaces. Further into the warehouse, going north along the east wall, there was a tenant whose living space was a small travel camper. To the north of the travel camper, also on the east wall, was another living space. At the approximate middle of the warehouse, there were 2 recreational vehicles. One was perpendicular to the east wall, and the second was perpendicular to the west wall, just north of the west door opening. The space between these 2 vehicles formed another hallway/walkway to the back of the warehouse. A few feet to the north of the vehicles was a raised platform. The platform had been built against the front wall of a trailer and extended out perpendicularly from the middle of the north wall. The platform divided the direction of travel to the rear of the warehouse towards more living units at the northeast and northwest areas of the first floor. The northwest area contained 4 living spaces. The northeast area contained 2 living spaces and a stairway to the second floor. Some of the living spaces contained multiple levels. For example, the recreational vehicle along the east wall had a space built on top of the vehicle where the tenant would sleep. The large travel trailer located off to the middle of the north wall had a space above it where an occupant slept. These elevated areas extended to within a couple of feet of the first floor ceiling. There were 2 stairways to the second floor. The front staircase was located along the east wall at the front of the structure. It was constructed of various wooden planks and wooden studs, as well as portions of wooden pallets at its top where it accessed the second floor. One of the 2 bathrooms was slightly elevated. The rear stairway was constructed of wood and located in the northeast corner of the building. A run of stairs ascended the north wall to a landing against the east wall, and another run of stairs ascended the east wall to a landing onto the second floor. Occupants said the second floor access to the stairway was concealed behind contents and furnishings. The electric subpanel serving the second floor was located on the east wall at the top of the stairway. Neither stairway exited to the exterior of the building. The second story contained fewer living spaces and hallways, and an open area for events was the predominant feature. A family lived in a space to the south end, and 2 other tenants were reported to have living spaces on the second floor, one along the east wall and one in the northwest corner. Most of the space was open with areas of couches and chairs for people to socialize. There was an area to the north end of the second floor where musicians or disc jockeys set up when events took place. The fire burned freely for a prolonged period of time before it was eventually extinguished by firefighters. The fire consumed nearly the entire roof, and the parts that were not consumed were either knocked down by the water being used to fight the fire or collapsed on its own under its own weight. The fire caused damage throughout the entire building and was extensive. However, upon examination of the interior of the warehouse, it was discovered that there was a greater degree of destruction to the materials inside the north end of the building. Based on fire patterns, fire damage, and witness statements, the area of origin of the fire was identified to be at the northwest area of the warehouse, and investigators were unable to access this area of interest until all of the debris between there and the main entrance was cleared. On December 3rd, the Oakland Fire Department investigators, deputies with the Alameda County Coroner's Bureau, Alameda County Arson Task Force officials, as well as alcohol, tobacco, and firearms and explosives certified fire investigators, met to devise a plan in the processing of the scene in order to accelerate the recovery of those victims still inside, but at the same time maintaining the integrity of the evidence for the investigation into the origin and the cause of the fire. They decided that the best course of action would be to begin at the main entrance and proceed inside, going north for the search and recovery of the victims that they would find on both the first and second floors. Victims on an intact section of the second floor would be recovered first, followed by the recovery of victims on the ground floor. After that, they would be able to make a smaller door on the west side of the building a little bit larger so they could bring in equipment inside as needed. Investigators would then enter into the warehouse through this entrance and process the building going east to west, eventually making their way to the northeast side of the fire where it's thought to have originated. This is where the back staircase would have been located. In order to handle the scene with care when searching for victims, investigators and firefighters used 5-gallon buckets to remove debris by hand while they recovered each person as well as search for evidence. A section of the second floor had collapsed into the southwest ground floor living area. Fire patterns in this area clearly indicated that the fire traveled from the north end of the building. North of the door, there was a passageway lined with pianos and other random items. They had some heat and soot damage to their upper portions, but the lower level items remained intact. To the east of this was the front staircase to the second floor. The bottom steps to the midsection of the staircase was intact. The upper section of the stairs and the second floor surrounding the staircase had collapsed onto the first. At the base of the staircase was a small sitting area. To the north of the lower steps was a restaurant-style booth covered in a leather-type material, and it was still in good condition. Next to the booth was a rattan chair. In the upper portion of this sustained fire damage, but the lower portion was intact. To the north of the sitting area was the first living space, a travel trailer. The second floor of the warehouse had collapsed onto this area. The trailer was heavily damaged by fire, with only the lower aluminum base and tires left intact. Debris was on top of the trailer and around on the sides. The first area of victim recovery was upon an intact portion of the second floor. Investigators were able to access this area by using a ladder placed next to the burnt-out travel trailer on the first floor. 7 victims were located in this portion of the second floor. A large wooden couch was next to them, and it was found intact and did not have any fire damage, and the floor in the area around the 7 victims was covered in soot along with some debris but did not sustain fire damage, and the floor beneath them was clean and undamaged. The areas of the second floor surrounding them had collapsed onto the first floor, and this created a platform. The area to the south had been a family living area, and the roof had collapsed onto this space at the southwest end. 2 more victims were recovered from an area on the first floor, just west of the location where the 7 victims were found. It was determined that these 2 victims had fallen from above with the collapse of the second floor. In this area, the contents of the first floor did not have any fire damage. A nearby white leather-like chair, a wooden headboard, and a wood piano were all intact and undamaged by fire. It was determined that the materials in this area had fallen with the collapse of the second floor, and this ended up protecting the contents of the first floor while exposing items that had fallen to fire damage. Later into the evening on December 3rd, after the recovery and removal of all the victims that were visible, investigators began to excavate the scene from the enlarged door opening on the west side of the building. As debris was being carried out in 5-gallon buckets, they carefully examined the debris that was taken out. Another victim was located within 10 feet of the west wall door opening under a large amount of debris, and fire damage to the items nearby was extensive. This was a normal effect due to the ventilation allowed by the nearby open door. Due to the amount of debris found underneath this victim, investigators were unable to determine if the victim was located on the ground floor at the time of the fire or not. The removal of debris and the investigation into the scene continued in an eastward direction. As some large pieces of debris were being removed, another victim on the ground floor became visible towards the north of the area being processed. Some large portions of the flooring overhead and other debris inhibited the recovery of this victim until they were able to clear a path in that direction, and this victim was eventually moved the following day on December 4th. As investigators continued east into the warehouse, 2 more victims were located. Based on the way that they were found with the second floor debris on top of them, it was determined that they were on the ground floor when the second floor had collapsed on them. They were located near a travel trailer along the east wall, and the fire damage in this area was extensive. By 3 in the morning of December 4th, debris from the west to the east wall had been cleared of all debris. Investigators continued to process the scene as they began clearing debris towards the north. A center pathway between 2 motorhomes was revealed, and they continued to remove debris. The motorhome on the west wall sustained fire damage to its top portions, but the lower portions were intact. Items from the second floor had collapsed into the motorhome. The motorhome on the east wall was also underneath the collapsed second floor along with the items from up there. The second floor surface of the wood flooring was unburned, but its subsurface or ceiling of the first floor was charred. The rear of the motorhome had the most damage due to the collapse of the second floor. But at the front of the motorhome, it had a wooden pallet vertically mounted to it, and it had a bike mounted to the pallet. A portion of the top of the pallet was burned, along with the seat of the bike. In between the space between these two motorhomes was a large area rug that was suspended amongst partially collapsed debris from the second floor. 8 victims were recovered from within this rug and next to it. To the north of the motorhome, on the west wall, were 2 pianos. The second floor had collapsed into this area, and some music equipment and furniture from the second story were in this area. The equipment and the furniture had some heat damage, but were not heavily damaged by the flames. Roofing material was also found in this area with heavy damage. 4 more victims were found in this area. To the northeast of this collapse was a wooden raised platform, and on top of that was debris from the second floor collapse. Among this debris, 3 more victims were found. 5 more victims were found directly south of that location on the first floor as well. It was determined that these 8 victims had fallen from the second floor. The platform was still in good condition, but the remaining wood that would have formed the walls for the space had been consumed by fire or heavily charred. On top of this platform, items from the second floor were found, and this included music equipment and extension cords. These cords were still in good condition and still plugged in. This indicated that the fire was above the platform and below the second floor. Investigators began to clear the area to the east of the platform to make their way to the rear staircase. This area had sustained extensive damage. The roof and the second floor had collapsed into this area, resulting in the charring of wood members and furnishings. This was one of the areas of the building that was the most difficult to reach while efforts to extinguish the fire was ongoing. Investigators cleared the area leading to the rear steps of the building, discovering that the first 4 steps were still intact. The rest of the steps were consumed by fire. Once investigators cleared the area to the east of the raised platform, they began processing the area where the motorhomes were located in the center of the warehouse. On top of the motorhome, on the west wall, a large rug containing a yellow couch and an octagonal coffee table had collapsed from the second floor into the motorhome. These items did not have any fire damage, but 3 victims were found within the large rug. The motorhome on the east wall was also examined. The second floor and roof had collapsed into that motorhome. Fire patterns indicated a top-to-down burning. Next, investigators focused on the northeast area of the building, which was identified as the area of origin based on statements from multiple witnesses, firefighter observations, as well as fire patterns. The entire area was cordoned off for the investigation into the cause of the fire, and that began on December 5th. Small pieces of debris were collected by hand and placed into buckets for removal from the area of origin. Large debris was examined and placed on tarps to be removed. The second floor and the roof had collapsed in on this area. The top of the wood flooring from the second floor was in good condition, but the underside of the flooring showed heavy charring. As investigators layered debris out of the northwest area, they removed electrical items and wiring and set them into grids that had been marked with green paint in the cleared out area to correspond with the areas from which these items had been removed. The collapse of the second floor made it difficult to distinguish which items came from which floor. The most heavily damaged area of the warehouse was the kitchen area on the first floor, and an area that residents had referred to as the office. Behind a large refrigerator, investigators located a metal duplex receptacle box. Plugged into one socket of the receptacle box was a relocatable power tap. The insulating materials of its cord had been consumed. The power tap itself was slightly warped by heat damage, but otherwise in good condition. There was a melted plug observed in the other socket, and its cord was no longer visible. The receptacle was fastened to a flexible metal conduit, but because of the destruction of the warehouse, the origin of the conduit could not be determined. Because the second floor had collapsed into this area, it was examined layer by layer. Tenants were brought in to help identify items that may have come from the second floor. In the debris, in front of the kitchen side of the wall, a metal duplex receptacle was found. It had sustained extensive fire damage, with only its metal parts left. Tenants said that this was the power source for the electronic equipment in the office. Based on the findings of the investigators, it was determined that the fire originated in the northwest area of the first floor, progressing throughout the building, growing in size and intensity as it did. The remaining intact portions of the second floor had burn damage on the bottom, and the upper side was not charred. The second floor completely collapsed in the rear half of the structure towards the north, and the fire patterns indicated that the flames burned above the floor level. Investigators considered the use of candles and incense as a possible heat source of the fire. Witnesses indicated that all occupants had been strongly discouraged from using these types of items, and the occupants in the area of origin of the fire stated that they were aware of the hazards of using candles and incense and were adamant that they were not using any of those items. No remains of candles or incense were found in the area of origin, but because of the extent of the destruction, the use of candles and/or incense could not be eliminated. The use of smoking materials was also considered as a potential heat source of the fire. But again, occupants indicated that smoking inside was strongly discouraged and were required to smoke outside. No one would openly accuse anyone who may have broken this rule, and no one saw anyone smoking in the area of origin leading up to the fire. No remains of smoking materials were found in the area of origin, but the use of carelessly discarded or unattended smoking materials could not be eliminated as a potential heat source for the fire. The building had no natural gas appliances. A propane heater was observed on the second floor, but it was not near the area of origin, so propane systems and appliances were eliminated as a potential source of heat for the fire. Arson had also been considered a potential cause of the fire, but the scene investigation did not reveal any indications of an intentionally set fire, and interviews did not reveal a motive for such an act. Occupants near the point of origin did not report seeing any unauthorized persons in the area, but the introduction of an open flame, intentional or not, could not be eliminated. As for the electrical systems, power taps, and extension cords that were used extensively through the warehouse, within the area of origin, all remains of extension cords, power taps, electrical conductors, wires, appliances, and their associated power cords were set aside for further investigation. But a forensic examination of these items did not reveal a failure that resulted in fire. Due to the nature of the electrical supply within the building, a fault or failure of the electrical system could not be eliminated. When the investigation was completed, no conclusive determination of the initial heat source or the first materials that were ignited could be made. Therefore, the cause of the ghost ship fire is classified as undetermined. As you can imagine, the complicated layout of the building and the lack of fire sprinklers, no smoke detectors, much of the random objects in the building being made of wood, caused a delay in the discovery of the fire, inhibited the ability to escape easily, and fueled the rate at which the fire spread. Neither staircase led directly to an exit. Very few people were able to escape from the second floor as smoke filled the stairway areas, and the stairs themselves eventually caught on fire. They got down on the ground and crawled along the floor as smoke filled the building, but they encountered difficulties finding the front doors because of the maze-like layout of the building, as well as blocked passages. Some survivors managed to find their way out the door because someone standing near the front door was continually shouting to come in the direction of his voice, as they were able to follow the direction the shouting was coming from. There were 5 musicians who were slated to perform that night. Only 2 of them survived. The other 3 were Johnny Igaz, also known as DJ Nact, electro-industrial performer Joseph Matlock, and house musician Chelsea Dolan. 17-year-old Draven McGill was the youngest fatality, and 61-year-old Wolfgang Renner, an electronic keyboardist, was the oldest. Everyone who died, with the exception of one, were visitors that evening. 6 months later, in June of 2017, Derick Almena, the property manager, and Max Harris, the venue's so-called creative director, were arrested and charged with involuntary manslaughter, accused of knowingly creating a fire trap in the ghost ship, then allowing it to be filled with human beings. Harris is the one who was in charge of the concert that was going on the night the fire broke out. Both men are known to have permitted as many as 24 people to illegally reside inside the warehouse. They failed to install or provide any kind of fire suppression equipment such as extinguishers, sprinklers, or even smoke detectors, and they allowed for the building to be filled with flammable materials from top to bottom. This, in turn, created a deadly maze which gave the victims little to no chance of escaping this fire. Max Harris had rented out the upstairs area that was available for events such as this to a promoter, and he was in the building at the time that the fire started to oversee this musical event. While preparing for the show, it was Harris who had obstructed one of the 2 staircases that would have served as an exit, leaving attendees only one way out as flames overtook the building. It is my understanding that the staircase was blocked with items to make room for the performance. As soon as the fire started, the power went out, and attendees attempting to escape the building were trying to make their way down the one very narrow wooden staircase that kind of looked like a gangplank, trying to get away from the smoke and flames. It was Derick Almena who had the illegal staircase built. Charges were not filed against the building's owner, Chor Ing, but she was awarded a $3 million payout from the insurance settlement. And it is my understanding that it's all hers. But she is named in a civil lawsuit filed by the families of the victims. As loved ones of the victims sat in the courtroom quietly crying, Judge Morris Jacobson read each of the 36 names of the victims out loud. Almena was sentenced to 12 years in prison, and Harris was given a 10-year sentence. But Almena's attorney told members of the media that he is certain his client will be out in under 4 years, and he has also stated that these pleas were not entered out of legal necessity because they had very viable defenses. It was a plea entered at a moral imperative to eliminate the drama and pain and suffering that everyone has had to endure. However, in a stunning turn of events, in August of 2018, the Alameda County Superior Court Judge James Kramer rejected the deals Almena and Harris received. This decision came a day after several grieving relatives of the victims urged the judge to reconsider the deal, arguing that the sentence were a slap on the wrist for the 36 lives lost. Judge Kramer said in court that he had reviewed the hundreds of pages of files in the case, as well as a letter Almena authored to a probation officer where he called himself a victim, and noted that Almena largely failed to express enough remorse for the lives that were lost. The judge did say that Harris's plea was legit, but they were a package deal, so they both had to go. And unless they reached a new deal that satisfies everyone, they will be going to trial. Both men again offered apologies, admitted guilt for allowing this to happen, never thinking something like this could have ever happened, but their deals were tossed nonetheless. The families want them in prison for 36 years, at least 1 year for each life lost. If there is a new plea deal, or if there is an outcome to the criminal trial, I will be sure to give you all an update on that. So now I want to spend the next several minutes telling you about each of the 36 victims. On December 9th, 2016, the Los Angeles Times published an article entitled "The Victims of the Oakland Warehouse Fire, Who They Were." I'm going to share parts of the article with you now. Cash Askew was 22 years old. She played guitar in a goth pop duo called Them Are Us Too, which had just released its first record in 2015 and had recently toured. Her girlfriend, Anya Taylor, called her a mega master of electronic music. Anya, an Oakland area musician and performance artist, met Cash about a year earlier and they bonded over their love of music. She said, quote, "We seem to have parallel lives. 2 bottles of trashy rosé and drunkenly singing Morrissey later, we just knew. We became instant family when we met." Cash was a transgender woman, and she and Anya shared a close-knit community of friends who were all artists, many of whom were at the warehouse that night. For many people who shared a queer identity, underground venues like the Ghost Ship Warehouse were places that they felt safe. Anya described Cash as the spirit of San Francisco, and that she wants the world to know how incredible she was, and that she loved her more than anything. Anya stayed home the night of the fire. She was going to go with Cash, but she had to work the next morning. When she didn't hear from Cash, she assumed that she was just having fun until she heard the news about the fire. She rushed to the scene and stood outside the building for hours. "I watched the building burn, and I lost the love of my life." Cash was described as a star, a shooting star. She was gentle, kind, and had a tremendous creative momentum. Everyone who met her loved her, and her death was an excruciating loss for everyone who knew her. Jonathan Birnbaum was 34 years old. He was born and raised in the Bay Area of California. He attended Berkeley High School, where he was a writer for the school paper and was a member of the debate team. He had a healthy kind of skepticism, and he often tried to sneak in extra debate practice by arguing at home with his family. He majored in history at Brandeis University in Massachusetts and went on to earn a Master of Fine Arts degree from USC's School of Cinematic Arts. He had a brief stint as an intern at Pixar, but his father said his son found his passion in recent years as a visual projection artist. Using techniques that he learned from film school, Jonathan combined kaleidoscopic patterns and scenes from movies, which were portrayed on huge LED screens at shows. At concerts around the world, Jonathan was in charge of synchronizing his visual creations with the music. Jonathan also had a passion for several causes, including making donations to the ACLU, as well as helping the Standing Rock Sioux tribe of North Dakota in the fight against the construction of an oil pipeline. Thoughts of his son trapped in the burning warehouse are overwhelming for Jonathan's father, so he tries to focus on the last time he saw him, when they said goodbye, and when they hugged. M. Bolka was 33 years old. She was a poet with a master's degree in literature. Her father, Jack, heard about the devastating fire and was worried he would have to wait a long time to hear for news. But police showed up at his home in Claremont, California at dawn the following Monday to tell him that his daughter was gone. M was a transgender woman who had transitioned earlier in 2016. Her life felt renewed, and her father was so proud of her, describing her as a loving, gentle spirit, thoughtful, philosophical. Her dad has said that this fire has brought attention to the transgender community, and he hopes that the attention stays, to let them all know that they are loved, and they truly can be who they are. Barrett Clark was 35 years old. He was a sound engineer who contracted with several venues in the Bay Area. Venue owners and the organizers of parties and festivals all knew him well. He was very well respected as an engineer, and so many people in the industry knew him. He was described as one of the nicest guys in the world to work with. He was in the background of so many events, and he always kept his cool, and he was always very open and kind, like a big teddy bear. He is described as extremely intelligent, generous, funny, and vibrant. He was an accomplished sound engineer, as well as a DJ, a musician, and a pretty good cook, too. He had a love for the outdoors and a boundless sense of adventure. Another friend described Barrett as one of the kindest human beings ever, a patient, caring, romantic goth kid who likes strange, dark music and all of the beauty of the world. David Klein was 24 years old. Amanda Walker, who taught David clarinet for 10 years, described him as a bright, fun-loving student who was both easygoing and serious at the same time, who excelled in school academically as well as a volleyball player. She had a special relationship with her student and continues to get together with his mother for coffee or a meal. She hadn't seen David for a couple of years, but said that's the beauty of Facebook. She said he was funny and he really enjoyed life, and that this is a huge and tragic loss, feeling tremendously hurt and pained that things are backwards. She never expected to be going to the funeral services for any of her former students. Micah Dannemeyer was 28 years old. He was an electronic musician and an experimental artist originally from the Boston suburb of Somerville, Massachusetts. He was described by friend Matthew Kissel as someone with a tremendous sense of humor, always happy and jovial, always cracking jokes. He was an open, honest, inviting person who through their friendship was able to help Matthew sort through some deep-seated social anxieties. Billy Dixon was 35 years old. A native of Chagrin Falls, Ohio, he was a computer engineer and a musician who played the guitar and keyboards. And according to family and friends, he was also a very talented music producer. It was apparent early on, when Billy was a child, when he began making music, having nearly mastered playing guitar by the time he was 11, that he was a prodigy. Childhood friend John Gunton said they fell in love with music together when they were kids, and said that Billy was a super gifted, super musically talented guy. Chelsea Dolan was 33 years old. In the wake of her death, her mother Colleen took to Facebook to remember Chelsea, describing her as an extraordinary person who was full of exuberant joy. Her mother said that by the time Chelsea was 3 years old, she was able to pick up any musical instrument and play any tune that she heard, even a song that she would have composed in her head. Chelsea studied classical piano while in high school, but eventually her interest turned to electronic music when she found that it more closely reflected the haunting sounds that played in her head. Chelsea also hosted a radio show at the radio station for UC Berkeley. Her mom said, quote, "Nothing Chelsea Faith did was ordinary. She was an adventurer. She was stellar in every way, and she will always be the star of our hearts." Alex Gasson was 35 years old and the father of 2 young daughters. He was an aspiring filmmaker who had recently transplanted from New York to Oakland. He was a freelance producer and director, most recently having worked for KQED, which is a San Francisco PBS affiliate. He was described by friends as a helpful, supportive person, always reminding his friends and family that he loved them. He had a passion for everything, whether it was working on a project, going to a party, or spending quality time with his family. His mother, Emily, told the media that her son had once lived in a loft in Jersey City, New Jersey, that was similar to the ghost ship. And the Friday night, while Alex was at the concert in the ghost ship, he had posted a video of the show on his social media with the caption that read, quote, "Oakland reminds me of hashtag Jersey City so much at times." Nick Gomez Hall was 25 years old. A graduate of Coronado High School, he worked at Counterpoint Press, a publisher based in Berkeley. Friends remembered him as a musical-loving genius, a brilliant artist, and his loss was devastating for his loved ones. A friend wrote on Facebook of Nick, quote, "He made me and many others feel less alone in some of the most challenging years of our lives. I hope his family and friends feel a little less alone knowing how much he impacted each and every one of us." Michaela Gregory was 20 years old. She held down 2 part-time jobs, one at a clothing store, another at a funeral home, while working on her degree in special education at San Francisco State University. According to her mother, Kimberly, Michaela's focus was communicative disorders, working towards a career where she could help children with special needs. Of her daughter, she said, quote, "She was just a wonderful person with a smile that lit up the room everywhere she went. There was not a harsh bone in that girl's body. If anyone was arguing, she was the first to pull you aside to help you two make up." Michaela lived at home with her mom, and that Friday night she said she was going out with her boyfriend of 5 years, Alex Vega. He also died in the fire. Mom said that the couple were inseparable, best friends, 2 peas in a pod. Sarah Hoda was 30 years old. She was a teacher at a Montessori school, and she loved working with children. Back in 2010, she and a friend, Carol Crudson, met when they had started their own collective, a place for artists and other creative individuals to stay when they couldn't afford the high cost of rent in Northern California. They had housed anywhere from 25 to 30 residents at any given time. Her friend described Sarah as a very active participant in that process, a unique and sweet person. Travis Huff was 35 years old. A native of Oakland, he was a creative arts therapist for a school in the San Francisco Bay Area, as well as a member in the band Ghosts of Lightning. His manager described him as a super fun person to be around, never knowing him to have a bad day, describing him as having a heart open to everything, a bright light for everyone that he ever met. Johnny Igaz was 34 years old. A jazz lover, a DJ, and a music producer, he was described by his younger brother Paul as someone who loved and cared about his community, stating, quote, "As I look back on the years we shared together, it is with certitude that I say that no single person has ever affected or influenced me more as much as my older brother. His love of music instilled an appreciation of diversity, and that ensures that his soul will live within my soul and the soul of all who knew him and his music eternally." Era Jo was 29 years old. She was a painter and an artist with a specialization in illustration, graphic design, crafting, as well as a hair and nail stylist. She was the co-organizer for the East Bay Alternative Book and Zine Fest, which is an annual event that celebrates independent written works. She also worked at the Ink Store, which was an art and printing retail store located in Berkeley. A coworker described her as incredibly energetic, someone who could cheer up a room just by existing, with a lot of energy packed into a little body. Written on Facebook of Ara, quote, "Everyone around you felt more alive and stronger by your presence." Donna Kellogg was 32 years old. An Oakland resident, she was on the second floor of the ghost ship when the fire broke out. She was remembered on her Facebook page as a beautiful, giggly, wise person, someone who would be very missed. People had been posting on her page throughout the day following the fire, wondering where she was, and it would be her sister who posted the news that her body had been found and identified, asking for prayers for the family. Commenters wrote that it's very difficult to write about Donna in the past tense. She was an incredible spirit and a soul that will be missed terribly. One friend and commenter wrote, quote, "Words cannot express how sad and shocked I am by this news. I truly feel for your family. Everything I type seems so inadequate." Amanda Kershaw was 34 years old. A graduate of Bridgewater State University, she was a professional photographer, and once her death was confirmed, friends took to Facebook to express their condolences for the beautiful spirit they knew her to be. A woman with a sharp sense of humor and boundless compassion. She touched everyone who knew her with her warm smile and unfailing positivity, and left indelible marks on the lives of all who knew her. She was described as an authentic soul and very beloved by the local music community in Oakland. Her husband Andy not only lost his wife, but also 2 friends, Chelsea Faith and Johnny Igaz. Edmund Lapine was 34 years old. The Evergreen State College graduate was also a musician. He had posted on Facebook the night of the concert that he was going to be at the Ghost Ship warehouse. After the fire broke out, his mother frantically posted on Facebook as well for him to post a message that he was okay, but he never did. He was described as charming, patient, and enthusiastic when it came to his music. Griffin Madden was 23 years old and had recently graduated from the University of California, Berkeley, with degrees in philosophy and Slavic language and literature. In a statement from his family, it is said that it is difficult to describe how much Griffin means to all of us and how profoundly lost we all feel without him. I'm just going to hope that anyone who reads this knows and understands what an unimaginable hole that there will now be in all of our lives. His girlfriend, whom he met on her first day as a freshman at Berkeley, wrote on Facebook, quote, "His light touched so many people. Your love for me echoes through all the support that I have been receiving from our friends and family. I am surrounded by the most beautiful, endless love from people who love you. I will miss you desperately. Everyone who knew you will miss you just as much." Joseph Matlock was 36 years old. He was an electronic and punk musician from Olympia, Washington. He was described as a real institution for Olympia. In the 6 months prior to his death, he had been working on shifting his creative path from rock music into the more hardware-based dance music, who has said the best advice that he could give to any of his friends who were musicians was to, quote, "Stop trying to be a performer and try to learn how to be a facilitator. This is not rock and roll. Let go of this mythology of Western individualism and accept that you are an active participant in something larger than yourself." Jason McCarthy was 36 years old. A native of Walcott, Iowa, he moved to California to pursue a career as an artist. Prior to coming to California, he attended art school in Baltimore. His aunt described him as very creative. Since he was a young boy, he would send her colorful pictures that he drew. And when the fire broke out, Jason's girlfriend, Grace, was in France studying abroad. She had been anxiously awaiting to hear from him, but she could wait no longer. She chose to skip her final exams and fly back to San Francisco, and she finally confirmed that he was gone. She carried with her a diary of poetry that he had written for her, as he loved speaking poetically. Draven McGill was 17 years old. He was an 11th grader at the Ruth Asawa School of the Arts. Though it was not the sheriffs who released his identity because he was a minor, it was the school who identified him as one of the victims on their website the following Tuesday. The post said that he was a baritone in the school choir and a young man who loved music and was classically trained. He was also the son of an Alameda County Sheriff's deputy. Jennifer Mendiola was 35 years old. Colleagues at UC Merced described the fifth-year health psychology graduate pursuing her doctorate as inquisitive and dedicated. She was a passionate and determined scientist, with her studies focused on how relationships and experiences influence risky behaviors. She had published articles in scientific journals, and she was a month away from finishing up her dissertation proposal. Jennifer Morris was 21 years old. She grew up in Foster City, located in the Bay Area of California. She was a student at UC Berkeley, majoring in media studies. She was described as an amazing friend with a smile that brightened up everywhere she went, an incredible musician and artist who was quiet but had the voice of an angel. She played the guitar, the ukulele, and piano, and she also wrote and composed music. She had also taken up painting and photography, described as having an amazing eye. She died in the fire along with her roommate, 21-year-old Vanessa Platkin. Farrell Pines was 29 years old and had recently moved to Oakland from Indiana and had only been there for about 3 months at the time of the fire. She was a musician who played bass guitar, and she was an animal lover. She was there to start a new life and found herself happier than she had been in a long time. She was a transgender woman who came to Oakland for its artistic scene and flourishing transgender community. Her brother described her as gentle, a sweet person, extremely intelligent. The last time he had seen his sister was on Thanksgiving. He received word of his sister's death the day after the fire from a friend of hers. Vanessa Plotkin was 21 years old and the roommate of victim Jennifer Morris, a native of Lakewood, California, which is a city right next door to the city I live in. She was a junior at UC Berkeley, majoring in sociology. She was also an intern at the campus radio station. Vanessa was described by her aunt as the sweetest girl she'd ever met, a girl who loved dancing and who loved laughing. Denelda Nicole Renee Segrist was 29 years old. She was described as an outspoken, authentic, talented individual. Her friends have said that she was not shy about expressing herself, and she was honest and genuine. The sound engineer for her band said, quote, "She was just honest about how she felt all the time, which was really refreshing. She was talented and one who always took pride in her work and her music." Wolfgang Renner was 61 years old. Originally from the German state of Bavaria, he was the oldest person to perish in the ghost ship fire. Friends, who referred to him as Wolfie, said that he was a musician who wrote and performed electronic keyboard music and who enjoyed loud tunes, spirited dancing, and good times. He was a fixture in the Bay Area's underground electronic music scene for decades and was a familiar presence at the late 90s goth events. One friend wrote on Facebook, quote, "I enjoyed your cocktail parties in San Francisco in the 90s. I had so much fun hanging out with you. Rest in peace, Cool Cat." Hannah Rao was 36 years old. She was described as the embodiment of joy, gratitude, and ambition. She was an entrepreneur, a yoga instructor, a designer of jewelry, and a stylist and creative director. She wore so many hats. She had an ability to help people, to see them realize their potential, and to reach their dreams. She taught yoga in a gentle, warm manner with an endearing sense of humor. She was deeply loved for her endless source of ideas and joy. She was the type of person who made new friends feel like lifelong friends very quickly. Her brother wrote on Facebook, quote, "You were taking so much care of others and everyone, sometimes you forgot yourself, but you still kept shining. This is probably why everyone loved you and you loved everyone." Her fiancé, Alex Gasson, also perished in the fire alongside her, a fact that brings her brother a small measure of comfort that she was with someone that she loved when she died. Ben Runnels was 32 years old and a bandmate of Denelda Segrist. He was described by friends as an introvert, but managed to work through his shyness, becoming a songwriter and a performer. On the weekends, he would go to Oakland area bars and clubs and play jazz standards, for which everyone would stop and listen. He was dedicated to his singing, his friends describing him and his voice as beautiful. Both he and his bandmate Denelda were said to be fearless, and their music was something to easily get lost in. Michelle Sylvan was 37 years old. She was described as an adventure seeker, talented and beautiful. She was in a relationship with Wolfgang Renner, who also perished in the fire. On Facebook, a friend of the couple described Wolfgang as a man who made everyone feel celebrated, and Michelle as a potent visionary who was wildly creative and always embraced adventures in life. Jennifer Tanue was 31 years old. Following her death, her aunt said that the world had lost a precious daughter, sister, niece, cousin, friend, and co-worker. She walked quietly in her unassuming way, sprinkling her brilliance and creativity, opening our eyes to a better world. Jennifer worked in music for years, at indie record stores, booking live acts, and most recently as a music manager. She was described as energetic and kind, which made her a favorite for artists to want to work with. Alex Vega was 22 years old. He loved old cars, music, and his girlfriend, Michaela Gregory, with whom he perished in the fire. He had 2 jobs, one as a valet at the University of California, San Francisco, and at a funeral home with Michaela. At a press conference following the fire and recovery of the victims, the Alameda County Sheriff's spokesperson said that rescue crews had discovered bodies holding each other, protecting each other. And Michaela's mom truly believed that it would have been her daughter and Alex. They were inseparable. She would say that she knew for a fact that they were hugging each other when they died. And within days, the sheriff's office did confirm that Alex and Michaela died in each other's arms. Alex was the youngest family of 4 brothers. His room now empty in the home of his mother and father. Peter Wadsworth was 38 years old. He was originally from Boston, Massachusetts, and was a resident of the Ghost Ship Warehouse. He was an eclectic artist and previously worked as a designer for a nonprofit Boston area theater. Another resident of the Ghost Ship described him as a walking catalog of knowledge, stating he was like our Dumbledore, our wise wizard. He was a genius. He was pure intelligence. At the time of the fire, he had broken his ankle trying to come down the loft. This inhibited his ability to escape the fire. Another resident was unable to help him. It was too hot and too smoky, and he was forced to leave Peter behind. Nicholas Walrath was 31 years old and a native of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He was an attorney with a bright future ahead of him. He had just signed on with the San Francisco law firm Dury Tangri LLP in November, just beginning his very first caseload when he died. He graduated from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology with degrees in physics and philosophy in 2007. He earned his law degree from the New York University School of Law in 2013. On Facebook, he was described as an incredible human who loved late-night bike rides in Brooklyn, rock climbing, and concerts. His bike was found chained outside the ghost ship, and on the night of the fire, the last text he sent his girlfriend read, "Fire, I love you." Brandon Chase Wittenauer was 32 years old. He was described as a kind and talented man, a devoted musician who regularly supported the art and music events his friends would perform at. He was as creative as he was supportive of his community, and he worked on his music tirelessly. For years, he dedicated his entire life to his craft. The magnitude of the loss of so many talented, creative, unique, inspiring, imaginative individuals is difficult to grasp. The void is massive. The artistic community of Oakland is indelibly scarred. 36 souls taken in such a very tragic and heartbreakingly avoidable accident. We don't yet know the outcome of the case against the proprietors of the ghost ship. We don't yet know what is to become of the millions of dollars in insurance money the owner has been able to collect. But as the story progresses its way through the California court system, I will certainly bring you some updates in the future. Thank you so much for listening to the 63rd episode of California Dreaming. If you would like more information about the Ghost Ship Warehouse or find out ways that you can help, please visit the website at www.helpghostship.com. There you will find links to the Oakland fire relief effort, information regarding community resources, services, therapy, and free goods. You could find links to donate money to an individual's fund if you are able to offer pro bono or low-cost services, and links to fundraising events. That's www.helpghostship.com. Please join us on the discussion page on Facebook, where we will talk about the cases we cover on the show. You can also follow California Dreaming on Twitter at CaliforniaPod, on Instagram at CaliforniaDreamingPod, or you can email me directly at californiapod@gmail.com. Don't forget to visit our Patreon page to browse some of the bonus content, and don't forget to leave those nice reviews. California Dreaming is proudly brought to you by the Orbital Jigsaw Network. We are a podcast production company located in Los Angeles, California, with a mission to create some of the best podcasts to listen to consistently improve upon our current roster of shows, to develop new content that appeals to all people all over the world, and to provide a thriving community for listeners and podcasters alike. I am so proud to be a part of this amazing group of shows and hosts, including The Concession Stand, Busted Wide Open, Super Nerds UK, 411, Historium, Vox Arcana, and The Podience. So please visit us at www.orbitaljigsaw.com. You can find links to all of our shows, our merchandise store, our blog, or if you just want to email us to let us know what you think, that's www.orbitaljigsaw.com. Thank you again for listening. This is Suzanne, signing off. Until next time, sweet dreams.
Canada may be known as the friendliest country in the world, but make no mistake, it has some of the most shocking criminal cases too. My name is Christy and I host Canadian True Crime. I'm Australian, but I've been living in Canada for many years. Canadian True Crime takes a deep dive into some of Canada's most well-known cases, like the Ken and Barbie killers, Robert Picton the pig farmer, and many smaller cases you probably haven't heard of, but are just as fascinating. If you're looking for the facts of the case told in a narrative storytelling format with ambient music, you can find me on your favourite podcast app or social media, just by searching for Canadian True Crime.
Hey, this is Chris, the host of Killer Jobs, the podcast that discovers the day jobs of the world's most famous serial killers. Explore how these psychopaths functioned in the real world, how murder interfered with their work, and what coworkers had to say. Killer Jobs investigates a new serial killer every Tuesday and is available on all podcast players.